This is a special edition of the RTI Press Pass powered by Rocky Top Insider. Here are your hosts, Jack Foster and Ryan Shumpert.
Welcome back to the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Foster, joined alongside Ryan Shumpert, as always, coming at you after the SEC baseball tournament in which Tennessee won. They went 4-1 down in Hoover and got their second SEC tournament championship in 3 years. For instant reactions of all the games in Hoover, you can go to Rocky Top Insider's YouTube page and check that out. Instead of doing post-game podcasts, we did instant reaction video on YouTube, and there's plenty of those to check out over there. But Ryan, this is all about the NCAA Regional coming up today. On this podcast, we're done recapping the SEC tournament. We're totally looking ahead today. Tennessee is the number one overall seed in the NCAA tournament, no surprise, and they get an interesting regional, to say the least.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Obviously, some immediate connections there with the 2 seed being Southern Miss, who they played last season, obviously, in the Super Regional down in Hattiesburg, and a lot of, not the same head coach who retired last year, but a lot of similar faces on that Southern Miss team. A lot of names fans will probably recognize when play starts this weekend. And then, obviously, a Big Ten team in Indiana who's, solid. To me, it feels like a pretty normal 3 seed, but at least a big name 3 seed, as opposed to, what last year Tennessee's 3 seed was Charlotte. And it's been a really good Campbell team. I think maybe who it was in 22. And then back to the Horizon League for I think Georgia Tech was the 2, were they not? Or was Campbell the 2 and Georgia Tech the 3?
It doesn't matter, but
yeah,
that was the 2. I thought Campbell was the 2, but maybe I'm wrong. So it doesn't matter. Though.
It does. It really, the 2 or 3, it really doesn't make a difference who is who. But then back to the Horizon League for 4, which I think is probably my biggest takeaway, is that we've talked about it before. It's not like the NCAA basketball tournament where it's seeded 1 through 64. And obviously, I haven't sat down and studied every single 4 seed in the event, but for Tennessee to be number 1 overall seed, I felt like they got once again a pretty good 4 seed in a game that they're not going to be able to take lightly on Friday night to open up regional play.
4 seed 2 years ago was Alabama State. Tennessee handled pretty easily. Of course, Charlie Taylor started that game. Last year, it was Lipscomb in the Clemson regional, right? And Tennessee didn't have to play Lipscomb, but obviously Lipscomb, a pretty good, solid program for the most part, beat Tennessee this year. So, I thought it was an interesting regional. Of course, Southern Miss being the headliner, it's just pretty funny that they're in Tennessee's regional.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a tough regional, though. When you look at this, Indiana being a Power 5 school, Southern Miss being what they are, 41 wins this season, and a feisty 4 seed in Northern Kentucky who's going to be playing their hearts out. Would you say Tennessee has a pretty tough regional?
Yeah, I would. I don't think it's anything overly, hard or just like egregious. I think Southern Miss is a solid 2, and I think Indiana is a solid 2. I think it is probably really simplistic way to look at it. For me, I imagine if I told this to the real baseball people, they would tell me I'm dumb. But a worse Tennessee team went to Southern Miss and beat a better Southern Miss team last year in a super regional. So a significantly better Tennessee team this year, I feel confident it's gonna hold strong. But obviously, it's not a 1-to-1 comparison. This isn't a super regional series. This is a regional and a best 2 out of 3. I think, again, if you're Tennessee, not to just harp on the 4 seed aspect of it, I would have wanted whoever won the SWAC, which I think was Jackson State won the SWAC this year. I'm not positive.
And that's who's projected to go to Knoxville and many of the D1 projections.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's a worse team than Northern Kentucky, who finished second in the Horizon League. Wright State won the regular season, but they won 2 out of 3 games against Wright State the final series of the year, and then beat Wright State in the Horizon League tournament. And that's just a league that hits the ball extremely, extremely well, as everybody will probably remember from that Wright State team in 21, and probably a little less like home run power on this Northern Kentucky team, but once again, a team that is really, really good at the plate. Ranks 5th nationally in runs, 6th in batting average, 7th in walks, 56th in home runs. So this is a really good hitting team, and a team that's going to be capable of scoring 5 runs against Tennessee Probably even more. It doesn't feel like it would be a crazy thing for Northern Kentucky to score 5 runs against Tennessee on Friday night. So, on the other side of it, their pitching isn't very good. As I said, that Horizon League's very heavy on hitting, and it's gone both ways. Northern Kentucky's pitching statistics are pretty bad in every category, and you would think Tennessee's offense will be able to score at least close to double digits, if not double digits, in this game and take care of business. But there is going to be some pressure on the offense to do that because if they come out and don't have a great game at the plate, I think this one very easily could get very dicey for Tennessee.
Yeah, and the opposite of that is Southern Miss, right? Their offense numbers aren't great, but their pitching staff has been, the strong suit of that team, similar to what it was last season. So, talk a little bit about your research into Southern Miss, as I feel like that's Tennessee's biggest threat in this regional. So, kind of what the Golden Eagles bring to the plate, no pun intended, this weekend.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's a really, really solid pitching team that has a couple of those best guys from last year back. Billy Oldham, Nico Mazza, two pitchers we saw a lot last year. Those are Southern Miss's 2 top pitchers, and I think when you look at this regional format, any team that has 2 good starting pitchers, if you're on the other side, that kind of catches your eye because obviously the 2 biggest games, it's a double elimination tournament, but we talked about this last year. It's a double elimination tournament, but the key is to win this, to win your first 2 games like it's a single elimination tournament. Because if you win your first 2 games, you're going to be set up in a really good spot. And any team that has 2 good starting pitchers is going to be in a good spot to do that, or in this case, we're talking about Southern Miss, a challenging out for Tennessee. So you're right. It's an offense that's been a little bit lackluster for a lot of the season, but the pitching is really, really good. Top 30th nationally in WHIP, top 30th nationally in strikeouts per 9 innings. Team ERA a little bit lower, 54th nationally, but a good pitching team. And you're right, it's kind of the inverse of Northern Kentucky. Indiana's a little bit in the middle where they don't really strike you great at anything, and then Tennessee's kind of in the middle too, but at a larger level where they're really good at all the hitting and the pitching statistics that you'd look at.
While Southern Miss is great at pitching and Northern Kentucky's good at hitting, Indiana a little bit more balanced. And as you put it, as you tweeted out, I believe Indiana is the most balanced team in this regional. Numbers certainly back it up. Indiana 15-9 in the Big Ten, lost to Nebraska in the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament, who ultimately won. 32-24-1 record this season. Common opponent. Just fun fact: Tennessee obviously swept Illinois in non-conference play. Indiana dropped 2 of 3 to Illinois, who ended up having a pretty dang good season and made the tournament, the NCAA tournament, that is. So Illinois, pretty good year for them. But Indiana, it feels like they're just pretty, I'm not going to say average because they're a good baseball team, but, they're pretty just in the middle of everything. They're very balanced. They're not great at, on the mound or at the plate, but they're not bad.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think, I'm not positive of this, but I'm pretty sure actually those series were back-to-back series for Illinois. I think they played Tennessee in their last non-conference weekend and then opened up Big Ten play a week later and beat Indiana 2 out of 3. Maybe 1 week in between, but close, concession to one another. And you're right, an Indiana team that's not really going to blow you away with anything they do. I mean, a couple non-conference series of notes with a couple common opponents. They swept Baylor in a 3-game series, who's obviously Tennessee beat in one game in that, one pretty big in their Sunday game in Dallas to start the year. They also had individual games against Vanderbilt and Alabama. They lost both of those, and then also lost games against Indiana State and Arizona, who Tennessee didn't play, but are 2 good programs. And I guess Arizona's a host, and Indiana State was probably Arizona. Honestly, might have taken Indiana State's host spot. They were both right on that line of being a host. They did beat Dallas Baptist, who's another team that was kind of on the edge of being a host and is a 2 seed. So good experience. They've kind of been a little bit less than 50-50, I guess you'd say, in those games against fringe NCAA tournament teams. Not a team that you can take super easily by any means, but I also think a third to Southern Miss in this one, and obviously Tennessee, and a team that I would be pretty surprised if they made a deep run. And they are balanced, but the hitting I would say probably is a little bit better. 33rd nationally in runs scored, 10th in doubles, which is something that kind of intrigues me on a weekend like this. A team that doesn't have a ton of home run power, 76 nationally with 78 home runs, But if you're hitting 134 doubles, which is 10th nationally in early June at Lindsey Nelson Stadium, there's certainly a possibility for a lot of those doubles to turn into home runs. So I'd say that would be kind of the thing I'd watch out for Indiana. And then the pitching statistics, pretty balanced. Strikeouts per 9 innings, probably what's most impressive. They ranked 24th in that with 10.1, and then pretty lackluster in both WHIP and ERA.
Tennessee, couple of spots ahead of Indiana in terms of doubles in the nation. Tennessee with 136, Indiana with 134, so they're right there. That's a pretty good stat, the doubles there from Indiana. So, when you look at this regional, how do you see it playing out? I'm not going to ask you like step-by-step predictions, but do you think Southern Miss will ultimately be the one to play Tennessee twice? Will they beat Indiana? And will Tennessee have to bounce the Golden Eagles again on Sunday to potentially sweep the regional?
Yeah, I think so. I think at the very least, I think Southern Miss, will be the team that makes it to the regional final. Obviously, they could still do that even if they did lose that first game to Indiana. I would pick them to win that first game, but both teams have pretty good, aces, so I could see it going either way. And certainly, I think Indiana's got a little bit more dangerous pop in the bat. But no, I think Tennessee is, definitely my pick to win the regional. I think Southern Miss is the most likely team to face them either twice or at least face them in the regional final or region final.
Let's shift gears, talk about Tennessee's makeup a little bit, and stuff we learned in Hoover, how maybe that translates into this NCAA regional. I think one of the biggest things is some developments at the DH spot. Reese Chapman had a great week. Didn't play in the final game against LSU as Cannon Peebles got that DH start and played the entirety of the game. But Reese Chapman, when he got his opportunities in Hoover, did really well. And we talked Saturday night, I believe, that feels like Reese Chapman may have a firm hold on that DH spot. And then Cannon started the final, but I still think that Chapman is the top in that order in the DH order, is what I'm saying, is going to get the most opportunities. So do you think we'll see more Reese Chapman than not at the DH spot in the regional?
I think we should, whether that's what we actually see or not. It's kind of a little bit of an element of who knows. There hasn't been a whole lot of consistency there. I would say Reese Chapman, I guess here's how I'd put it. I feel confident Reese Chapman will get over 50% of the at-bats at the DH spot this weekend, or plate appearances. I'm not as confident that he's going to get over 50% of the starts. So I think he's locked himself into being the guy that they probably trust the most, but, going off matchups, going off batting practice, which we've seen Tony Vitello do frequently the back half of the season, it might not necessarily mean. I don't think he's just completely won the job and he's going to completely get a start no matter what. So I think you still might see some changes, but he's certainly the guy you have to have the most confidence coming in to this week after having a really nice week, not even just weekend, but a really nice week at the SEC tournament.
And then the catcher spot, we know Cal Stark is the guy, and he certainly proved that and deserved that because, he could argue, he did make the play of the game against LSU, in my opinion, picking off the runner at first with the bases loaded situation to get out of the inning. That was so huge in that game, and especially with how the ninth inning ended up going, it was even more massive. So when you look at the catcher spot, though, Cannon Peebles has definitely gotten better at the plate. He's not raking by any stretch of the imagination, but he certainly has rebounded from his poor start offensively and has some life with his bat, whether it's just working really good ABs, getting the pitcher's pitch count up, coming in an RBI spot, getting a sac fly, RBI ground out, what have you, or just, getting the ball in play quite a bit. Cannon Peebles has had a good presence there. So do you think maybe we could see a catcher start for Cannon Peebles, maybe one in a given weekend, and he's going to be in that DH mix as long as Tony Vitello is okay with not having a backup catcher, meaning his backup catcher would be Charlie Taylor or possibly Dalton Bargo, but I think it would be Chuck. So it feels like we're going to see more of number 5 here in the postseason, given what he's shown the last couple weekends.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think we'll see him get a start. I think it's maybe there's more trust to go to him in a situation like, I guess it was the Mississippi State game in the quarterfinals where Cal Stark had some bad at-bats and had a real bad at-bat after things kind of got escalated. I think you might see more confidence to go to Cannon in that moment, but I don't necessarily think we're going to see him get any starts. At least that would be my prediction. And yeah, I mean, it feels like he's the next guy in the DH conversation. So maybe you see him get more at bats there. Now we finally saw him, I guess, in the championship game. We finally saw him start Cannon at DH. It seems like they really haven't wanted to do that, but they finally did it. And like you said, I think it's more than anything the at bats feel better. The numbers really aren't that glaringly different. I mean, I don't think anybody would say Cal Stark had a good weekend or a good week at the plate. He went 1 of 11 with 2 walks, and it feels like Cannon was a lot better than that. But he went 2 and 9 with 1 walk, so they got on base the same amount of times, and a couple more plate appearances for Cal. So I do think Peebles is probably the number 2 option at DH right now, especially from just a switch hitter aspect. It feels like Tennessee's other good options, or all the options that they have some faith in there, are left-handed hitters. So maybe in certain opportunities we could see more of him, but I don't feel like, at least, could obviously be wrong, I don't feel like Cannon's knocking on the door of getting a lot of, or getting starts at behind the plate in these games going forward.
That's fair. We did see Tony Vitello experiment with the lineup on Saturday night against Vanderbilt, right? And
Yeah,
Billy
Saturday.
Amick was the DH, put Dalton Bargo at third, Ariel at short, Cannon was behind the plate. That made a lot of sense because it's a tournament setting. It's Cal Stark catching every day. You get tired. So Cannon got the catcher start. But the Billy to DH was interesting. And I really think Tony was just using that game to experiment. And no, that's not something we're going to see in the NCAA regional or in Omaha. I feel like Billy Amick's still going to be the third baseman. And, maybe some people think that, I know we touched on this in our instant reaction video, but I just don't think that that's something you're going to see often because it was a game where it felt like Tony Vitello was just experimenting.
Yeah, I completely agree. I guess two thoughts. One, going back to the last one. If Tennessee were to lose one of its first 2 games, because if they do that to win the regional, they're going to have to play an extra game in that case. I think if that's the case, then it becomes possible that Cannon would get a start, because then instead of playing 3 or 4 games, you'd have to play 5, right?
Right.
Or is it 4? Yeah. So in that scenario, if you know that and you kind of got a hole to climb out of, then yeah, I could see Cannon getting a start just to rest Cal. But back to what you were just talking about. Yeah, no, it felt like pure experimentation. And if it was Curley at third and Ariel at shortstop, you'd maybe feel like this was more something they're more seriously considering. And the fact that Ariel didn't play well and really didn't hit well at all in any of his opportunities at the SEC tournament makes it feel like it's not that realistic. I'll tell you what, I think that's interesting to me, and I don't really think this has any ramifications on what's going to happen, but I'll tell you what I find interesting is Bargo hit really well in that game. He played third. And Bargo, when he was playing well earlier this season in SEC play, was when Billy Amick was out and he was playing third. And it's been when he's DH that he hasn't been able to find any sort of success. And, baseball is an interesting game and a game of routine and habit. And there's just some guys that it seems like they hit a lot better when they're playing in the field too. And the sample size is probably too small to say that that's truly 100% the case with Bargo. But when you're talking about a guy that struggled a lot in the DH spot and has now in 4 or 5 starts been pretty consistently good at the plate while starting at third base, it is kind of something that's interesting to keep an eye on.
Man, I haven't thought about that yet, but that is very true. We got to run the numbers on that at some point. Just go back and ensure we get all those correct, because it's probably very different as terms of the stats at the plate. Yeah, because he was lifeless as the DH at the plate. But like you said, that Georgia series when he started at third, this game in Hoover, he's been great. And he's been among the top 9 bats on Tennessee's team. And Tony Vitello said repeatedly in the regular season, he is one of the best 9 hitters we have. It's just, he's obviously struggled a little bit. So Dalton Bargo's still going to get ABs for Tennessee in the postseason. He's still going to be in the mix. Whether he's playing defensively, doubt it. But maybe it could happen. I do think if Tony's going to move the infield, I don't know. What do you think's more likely? Here, I'll ask you. What do you think's more likely for a defensive change? Curley to third, Ariel to short, Billy DH, or just Bargo to third for Billy DH? What's more likely for Tennessee to do in a postseason game if they're going to change something defensively?
I think it's probably Bargo to third. I just don't
Because
think we've seen
Ariel
enough.
is.
Yeah, we just haven't seen enough from his bat, I don't think, to do in that scenario. And certainly, it was a nice kind of bounce back week for Dean Curley after a really bad weekend against South Carolina, but it just still feels like there's not a whole lot of pop in his bat right now. There's not a whole lot of extra base hit material. You're hoping that he can work walks, you're hoping that he can get singles, and all that stuff's worthwhile. But I think when you talk about having him and Ariel and whoever's starting at the catcher cow spot, then that's three guys. That's kind of all you're hoping for. And, Ariel, I just don't think at this point Ariel has had enough at bats against quality opponents that you feel like he's going to be able to be productive enough at the plate.
All fair. As far as the pitching goes for Tennessee, it's going to be the same song and dance, more than likely, with the Stamos-Kazi stack. Game 1, Stamos coming off a season best outing in my eyes, at least when he's been at the starter. 3 1/3, that's a season-long outing for Tennessee. When they played Texas A&M, he looked really good down in Hoover. Kazi's continued to look really good. That's Tennessee's Friday plan. Of course, Drew Beam on Saturdays, with mostly Combs going to be relieving him. And then on Sunday, Xander Sechrist is coming off back-to-back 6-inning outings in which he has just dominated. So the fact that Xander Sechrist is turning into a starter maybe for Tennessee rather than an opener, as he was used a lot before giving way to Snead. Now I think you have to consider him a legit starter for Tennessee, and he's done well against some really good SEC competition. This could be the biggest development for Tennessee entering the NCAA tournament, is that Xander Sechrist, you may be able to depend on him to go 5-6 innings, 70, 80 pitches, and be really good doing it.
Yeah, no, it's huge, and I talked about it. We talked about it, I guess, after the Vanderbilt game in our instant reaction video, where it's just that when there's questions about the depth of your pitching staff, any inning a guy can give you over what the expectation is huge. And I think for Xander, you don't really know what the expectation is because there's been a lot of 4 2/3, or at least a handful of 4 2/3 to 6-inning outings. But then there's also been a lot of just 2-inning outings, and that's a big difference, whether he's on or he's not. There hasn't been a whole lot of 3-inning outings or 2 2/3 inning outings for Xander. It feels like it's kind of been boom or bust. So that's big. It would mean a lot for Tennessee. And like you just said, I think maybe the most important part, not only has he been going deeper into games, he's been really good in those starts. And it doesn't necessarily matter for the immediate future for Tennessee, but I think if Tennessee makes a deep run, what's maybe most encouraging about it, and I talked to Xander yesterday for a story, and I hadn't really thought about it till he talked about it. He hadn't been very good on the road. Like, almost all his good starts have been at Lindsey Nelson Stadium. He'd had 3 of the 5 SEC appearances at Lindsey Nelson Stadium were really good. A 4th one against LSU was solid. And most of his starts on the road had been bad. And for him to, obviously it's not a true road game, but for him to go into a neutral site and pitch really well, I think is probably encouraging for what, Tennessee, in a park that's very similar to whatever they're calling the field, whatever bank is sponsoring the field in Omaha these days. I think it is really encouraging if Tennessee can make a run.
Yeah, it's a good point. And of course, Xander's going to be pitching at home the next 2 weeks if Tennessee makes it that far. So on the road to Omaha, Xander will be in the friendly confines of Lindsey Nelson Stadium. As far as the other pitchers go, Nate Snead, Kirby Cannell's going to fill in the gaps. Marcus Phillips provided a great relief performance in Hoover, 3 innings out of the bullpen. First inning he pitched was phenomenal. Then the next 2, a little rocky, but Tony Vitello stuck with him and he powered through. I think that's the most important Marcus Phillips outing of the season because kind of gave you confidence that he could provide some big innings if Tennessee needs him to in Omaha potentially. And then Andrew Binke had 1 great performance, a couple of not so great, 1 average, 1 definitely not great in the final game against LSU. But one more pitcher I want to hit on is Dylan Loy, who quickly relieved A.J. Russell, who was the opener in the SEC tournament final against LSU. I guess we should hit on him after Loy, too. But first up, Dylan Loy, 4 2/3, completely dominated the LSU lineup. I don't believe he gave up a run. Let me make sure I'm right on that. Dylan Loy, yes, he
That's
did
correct.
not.
Yeah.
He gave up one run, but it was against in Hoover, but it was against Vanderbilt the first time. So didn't give up a run against LSU. 4 2/3, as I mentioned, was lights out there in extended relief for Tennessee.
Yeah, he really was. And, not only was he just not give up a run, it didn't feel like there were a whole lot of base runners on him. I think he retired 7 straight at one point in the game, maybe 10 out of 11 batters. I want to say it was 4 total base runners, and one of those, 2 hits and 2 walks, and one of those was an intentional walk to Jared Jones with 2 outs and Tommy White standing on second there in what I believe was the 3rd inning. Yeah, I think it would have been the 3rd inning. So he just shut down, a solid LSU lineup, and certainly an LSU lineup that had been hitting really, really well as of late. And when you kind of start to try to talk about roles and carving out what we could see these guys do, especially these fringe guys do, to me, and obviously opportunities and the way games flow and how they opportunities present themselves changes. To me, going into the NCAA tournament, of those 3 guys, I kind of see Binky as a come in and get a lefty or 2 out type of guy, short spurt. I see Phillips as if you need a guy to come in and get a couple outs to end the game, just because of his high leverage stuff. And I kind of see Loy as if you need a more long relief, or maybe not even necessarily long relief, but an inning or 2. If a starter struggles, if one of those guys you're counting on to be good is not good, and you got to fill in the gaps, I kind of think Loy's the guy that you toss out there and hope that he can give you a couple innings. Obviously, I could be wrong on all that. All that stuff could be changed.
No,
Beaky's probably the one I feel the most confidence in that. Like Beaky's role definitely feels like the lefty specialist in the bullpen. But those are kind of for 3 guys that Tennessee's hoping they don't have to rely on a ton. If they do try to either steal a couple outs with them or do need to rely on them, I think that's kind of how you could see that all unfold.
No, I think that all makes sense, and I think they all earned a place in the mix in Hoover, whereas beforehand, maybe not Binky, but definitely Phillips and Loy, you could argue they don't need to be pitching in Omaha. I think with what they did in Hoover, they deserve a spot in the mix now, especially Loy, man. I mean, that was he was the MVP of that final game, so against LSU. And then Phillips, you kind of talked about high leverage, final outs, a couple things. I think he's Snead light for this team. Nate Snead can do both. He can do 5 innings of relief. He can do the last 2 outs and just blow hitters away, and it's electric factory stuff. But Marcus Phillips is like the latter of that. And it feels like Marcus Phillips is either going to be really good or really bad. So if you can get the really good side, man, it's going to be so crucial for Tennessee in a big spot probably.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important. It's important that I almost don't even want to give Marcus Phillips a 9th inning. I want to give him 1 or 2 batters is kind of what. Because even, he was, this is going to sound like I'm dissing him or whatever. I'm not meaning to, because he was really good and really important in that Vanderbilt game. But he still gave up 2 runs in 3 innings. So it wasn't like he was just...
Yes. The first inning was great. The last
Yes.
2 innings, it was like, oh, Tennessee may lose this game. But like I said, Tony stuck with him. He was able to kind of work through it. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
So it feels like, and obviously that was a different situation. They needed him to throw those. They were kind of in a position where obviously they could have thrown somebody else in there. But in a game that they didn't have to win, it made a lot of sense. So, I kind of see those being the roles for those guys. And, how much they have to get used will be interesting, because this is kind of the week that you point to of really thinking you might need them. Super regional 3-game series, you're not going to need all of them. You might need 1 or 2. And even in Omaha, which is, the same format, you have days off between games. And again, it doesn't mean you won't necessarily have to need them, but there's more rest. You're not playing, you don't have the potential to play 5 games in 4 days like you do, like Tennessee does this weekend.
All true. AJ Russell, last pitcher to hit on, made 2 appearances in Hoover, 1 in Tennessee's first game, pitching 1 inning against Vanderbilt in Tennessee's 13-4 loss. Looked pretty good after allowing base runners to his first 2 batters. Both of them got on base, but he worked a scoreless inning after that. Looked pretty solid, 22-pitch inning. And then he started the SEC tournament final against LSU, but was used as an opener, as we all imagined. But maybe didn't go as long as we thought, given the pitch count in the first inning was only 13. Did allow a solo homer to Jared Jones, who blistered a ball 470 feet.
Yeah.
But outside of that, it was a fine inning for A.J. Russell. Like I said, only 13 pitches. So it's a little bit surprising he didn't come out for a second. Everyone went up in arms as, Jeff Wood, trainer, Woody was looking at A.J. Russell's elbow in the dugout. Come to find out after the game that was going to happen anyway, where they were going to link up, and probably Woody's asking him how it feels, probably rubbing around, whatever a trainer does. So that felt like not a big deal. What's kind of your take on how A.J. Russell might be used for Tennessee, given what we saw in Hoover?
Yeah, I think, I guess I'd start by saying I felt like even though he gave him the run, I thought his LSU outing was better. To me, he just looked crisper and made one mistake to a good pitcher a good hitter in Jared Jones. I think the thing that probably stands out the most is just the velo was down. I mean, he was throwing like 92, 93 instead of 97, 98, which I think limits what I envisioned his role being, which is kind of what we were just describing for Marcus Phillips, but maybe a full inning at the end of the game of a high leverage, high end reliever that could come in and kind of blow things past some of these lineups. I'm not sure he's going to be that, but he's a guy I think that could pick up an inning at any point. The fact that he only got clean innings in his first two appearances back this past week, I think are interesting. Is he a guy that they would trust to bring in a tight spot? But I imagine we'll see him again this weekend, though it doesn't feel like the role is going to be huge. And kind of just emphasizing, what Tony Vitello said before and what he told AJ and what he told the team is like he's not coming in to save anything. He's just coming in to help us out in a few spots, and it feels even maybe more like that than I imagined it would be.
Yeah, no doubt. Game times for this weekend. Game 1 on Friday, which of course Tennessee is not playing in, but it will be Southern Miss versus Indiana. So you may want to watch. It's going to probably be a good game. 1 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN+. Game 2, the nightcap in Knoxville, will be Tennessee against Northern Kentucky, which, by the way, is the Norse, and that's a pretty cool mascot. 7 p.m. Eastern time on SEC Network, so that one will be televised. Saturday, game times will be noon and 6, and that'll be the same for Sunday, and then Monday, if necessary, is TBD. So we got noon and 6 on Saturday and Sunday, 1 and 7 on Friday. Ryan, anything else you want to add before we wrap up our regional preview pod here?
Yeah, just we'll have, by the time this is out, we'll have a story up on just kind of some of the top players from a statistical standpoint and basically every major hitting and pitching statistic. So that's an interesting look at the kind of constants, and I guess it makes sense because of what we said earlier. In the hitting category, ton of Northern Kentucky and Tennessee. In the pitching category, a lot of Tennessee and Southern Miss with some Indiana sprinkled in there. I think Northern Kentucky had a couple guys on there in the wins category, which, speaks to, I think one of those guys that one pitcher, I think for Southern Miss had 9 wins. And then it was 4 people with 8 wins after that. 2 of them were Northern Kentucky. 2 were Beam and Snead for Tennessee. One of the guys who had 8 wins for Northern Kentucky had like a 7.7 ERA. So that kind of shows you why the pitching win statistics not one of the most important. But kind of matches up we said. Tennessee, very constant with the best players in every category. A lot of Southern Miss pitchers and a lot of Northern Kentucky hitters.
Well, if you want to follow Ryan, he's at rshump00 on all social media. I'm at Jack Foster Media. You can follow Rocky Top Insider at Rocky Top Insider. And, of course, keep up with all Tennessee athletics coverage, whether that's Chaz Lanier committing, Tennessee baseball postseason, football look-aheads, what have you, on RockyTopInsider.com. We will have live update threads for every game in the NCAA Regional live from Lindsey Nelson Stadium this weekend, so be sure and check that out. Until next time, what are we doing, Ryan? Do you think we'll do the instant reaction vids again this weekend?
Yeah, probably so.
So if you want to have game recaps, go to Rocky Top Insider YouTube. Check out our instant reaction vids after every Tennessee baseball game here in the regional. But until next week, for Ryan, I'm Jack. We'll see you.